Hello and welcome back to TGE's Current Read. I am Sam Herbst and my guest today is Cecile Pin, author of the standout debut novel Wandering Souls. Cecile, once an editorial assistant for Penguin Random House, is now a full-time writer. She also contributes to Books magazine Bad Form Review and was longlisted for their Young Writers Prize. She's also a 2021 London Writers Award winner and was longlisted for the UK's Women's Prize for Fiction for Wandering Souls. Welcome, Cecile.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
The success of this debut, Cecile, has really been incredible and so well-deserved. It's like I mentioned, it's on my list of recommendations now with Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, and it will go down in history as a book that had me sobbing, which is really unusual for me. But Cecile, just firstly, congrats on this accomplishment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's very kind.
So for those who are listening who might not know about the book or what Wandering Souls is about, what, in your words, from the author, elevator pitch it to us. What is this book about?
Sure. So Wandering Souls is a book that's partly based on my family history of my mom, who was a Vietnamese boat person who left Vietnam after the Vietnam War. But so the book follows three siblings, An, Tan, and Min, who leave Vietnam after the war and spend some time at a refugee camp in Hong Kong before settling in the UK in the late 70s, early 80s, and which is the sort of Margaret Thatcher era. So it's a time of really great political and societal upheaval, and it's really the three siblings trying to build new lives for themselves there, while also dealing with immense grief, because on the journey they've lost their parents and four of their younger siblings. And so the book also includes a bit of nonfiction elements and is a bit of questions, the purpose of writing and explores just the Vietnamese diaspora in the UK and explores also the concept of mourning and grieving.
I loved learning about this era. I don't know much. I was born in 1987, to give away my age. So I knew of, Margaret Thatcher and England, living in South Africa, colony of the UK or former colony of the UK. And I didn't know a lot about this history, and it was such a pleasure, well, not a pleasure knowing about what happened, but just to learn and grow. I'd love to know more about your process. How much did you learn and grow, and what in the first place inspired you to start writing Wandering Souls?
Yes, so I didn't know much about the Vietnamese diaspora in the UK, and I think it's not one that's been very, I don't think there's been a lot of books or movies or anything written about it. So I really wanted to kind of shine a light on that. And my mom, she moved to France instead of the UK, so that's when the book is very much fictional in that sense. But I was inspired to write this book from my family history and just from a desire of wanting to know more about my past and where I came from and my identity as well. And I decided to set the book in the UK because I think that, as I've said, not a lot is known about that diaspora and that history of that part of the country, really. And I've been living here for almost 10 years, and I just really wanted those people to be seen, even for just a few hundred pages. So I think that's really all those elements kind of came together, and that's when I decided to write the book.
Going into the actual text, your experience of learning about your family's history was fragmented. And you've mentioned, this novel it's historical fiction, so it's inspired and partly based on your family history, but you can't take it as, your family went to France, this family goes to the UK. It is different. You have separated the experiences, but you've fragmented the narrative. So can you chat more about your decision to structure the book in this way?
Sure. So I think it was important for me both mentally and also as a writer to make the book fictional and to give myself that kind of creative freedom as well, to make the characters my own and just the story its own thing. So I made the decision quite early on to change the setting from what happened to my family, and also to not ask my family and my mom too many questions, because I really wanted the characters to not be based on real person, to not be based on my mom and uncles and so on. And then I was really interested when writing the book as well about the idea of why someone would write such a book, because it requires a lot of research, and it required me to learn a lot of things that were tough. For example, the sexual assault, or the violence that would go on at the camp and on the boat journey, and so on. And so I was really interested in exploring as well the purpose of writing and the kind of cathartic quality that writing can have. And so I brought those more essay-like nonfiction elements in the book, and also the concept of mourning that I think varies from culture to culture. And this book is quite multicultural in some ways, right? Because it takes place in Vietnam and in the UK. And just the idea of how one person can move on from trauma, and how can one person grow, and how can trauma affect different people and different generations as well. And I also wanted to set the book in real life, and show readers that this is, even though the characters or in that particular story is fictional, this is something that really happened, right? And there really were those boat people who came to the UK during that time. And so I think the best way for me to do that was to include some kind of newspaper-like articles, and a real, meeting minutes that from Margaret Thatcher, and for example, the book also includes a real-life letter that she sent to a little Vietnamese boy at a camp. So I think just including those real-life elements helped set the book in the real world as well.
So that nonfiction part of the book, was that directly extracted, or was that fiction on your part? Did you write that as fiction, or did you pull from actual newspaper cuttings?
So it kind of depends. So the latter I left as is, and then the newspaper articles I wrote them. They're based on facts and stuff, but I kind of wrote them myself, if that makes sense. But I kind of like the idea of merging fiction and nonfiction, and letting it be up to the readers to decide if they want to make that extra step and Google what's actually real or not real in the book. For example, the book talks about Operation Wandering Soul, which is it's a real life operation that the U.S. Army undertook during the war. But a lot of people, even my age, didn't really realize that was a real thing, and that operation really took place. And so I like that idea of, well, that the book is a bit of an invitation for readers to make their own research if they want to as well.
So I did actually research Operation Wandering Soul. And I did do some Googling, and that's what I love about this genre, is because it prompts you to separate fact from fiction. And not, I don't do it to fact check authors, but I do it to know more, and ensconcing it in fiction in that way gets me really hyped about learning about these things. So Ocean Vuong calls Wandering Souls genre defying, which based on the different, you can't really call it mediums, but a sort of narrative structures that you use. That's what makes it genre defying, is you have the story, the main story arc, and then you have, all of the different nonfiction elements that you've added. So we've spoken about that, and we haven't spoken about the poetry interspersed with the news reports, journal articles. There's the poetry. Tell me about your research for this book. Were there some puzzles? I'm curious to know, because I know that you wrote really late at night. You had a full-time job. It was 2020. It was a high-pressure filled environment at a time where a lot of writers and creatives were ingesting more than creating. But you created during this time, and you had a full-time job. So was it a lonely endeavor, and was there anything that surprised you or motivated you as you delved into that research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was definitely quite a lonely moment for me, and I think for the whole world, really, because we weren't allowed to go out for some of that year. But a lot of the research was just me on my computer late at night, Googling archival, documents and looking at testimonies and photographic evidence as well, so I could get the description of the camps, right, for example. And it was hard, especially as I've said before, like learning about the hardships of the journey and the sexual assault and so on that would happen at times. So it was hard, I think. And then looking back, it's all a bit of a blur. I can't really remember writing it. But I think it was, for that book, it was probably useful for me to be in such a bubble, and just to have that focus and that quietness as well. So looking back, I think I wrote the first draft in about 6 months or so it was quite an intense period as well. But and then it was nice to have that mix of genre, because it allowed me to have some breaks, and if I wanted to take a break from the research, I could go and write the Dao parts. Dao, who's their diseased little brother, who kind of talks to the narrators in a place from in between the living and the dead, and which are the most, I guess I don't call them poetry because I didn't mean it to be poetry, but I guess the kind of more poetic chapters of the book who have a bit of a different structure. So that was quite nice to be able to shift between different parts of the book as well.
Operation Wandering Souls, as you've mentioned, is a real event that happened, and in Book Talk and Bookstagram, there's a trend to where as you're reading, when you find the title, you hashtag found the title. So that's Wandering Souls is obviously where it came in. Operation Wandering Souls is obviously where the title comes in. What exactly was it? Because do you mind sharing that? Is it too much of a spoiler for the reader?
No, of course. So Operation Wandering Soul was a real-life operation that the U.S. Army undertook during the Vietnam War, which played on the Vietnamese belief that if you don't bury your dead properly in their hometown, then they'll be left to wander for eternity as ghosts or as wandering souls, and unable to rest. So what the U.S. Army did is that they would play in the jungle those tapes, and you can listen to one of them online. It's called Ghost Tape Number 10. So tapes that were supposed to mimic the sound of diseased Viet Cong soldiers sing, like, with very airy, strange sounds, and sing things like "Comrade," like, "Look at me now, like I'm diseased," and stuff like that. And the goal was basically to scare off and to demoralize the Viet Cong army. So it's a very strange operation, and I think I was quite struck by the title of it, because it sounds quite poetic, I think, Operation Wandering Soul in some way. So I was very interested in that, and I think all the characters in the book in some ways are wandering souls one or another, right? So you've got Dao, who's a literal wandering soul, a ghost, and then I think also An, Tan, and Min, the siblings, they found themselves in the UK alone, orphans, and they're not quite sure which way their lives should go, what they should be doing, because their parents are not here anymore. And so I think they are a bit wandering souls as well. So I quite like the idea that title linked the characters in some way.
I love Dao. I found him to be such an endearing character from the get-go, and I think that's I'm an older sister, or a sister, and I'm a mother, and Aunt takes on this mothering role. Obviously she takes care of her younger sibling. She's the oldest, and they go through this trauma, and so she kind of takes her brothers under her wing. But included in this is Dao. So as a writer, I'm wondering, I mean, he's 4, right? At the time of his death. So how did you channel his voice? Because I find that, as you mentioned, you wrote him in a different format, not quite intentionally poetry, but it does read and look like poetry. There's so much innocence there, but it holds a lot of weight, especially towards the the latter part of the book. So I'm wondering how you channeled that innocence in that voice.
Yeah, it was quite hard getting that voice right as well. And I had a lot of conversations with my, my editor and my writing group about like what he should sound like, because I think he's 7, but I can't remember now. But I think he might be 7. I think I remember changing, so he might have been 5 when I started. But then I think we settled on 7 because again, it was like we wanted him to sound young, but then we also wanted him to sound quite wise because he's a ghost, and that's how you picture ghosts, right? As quite those wise souls. So and then on the page, readers can see that the sentences are not a straight line and they kind of wander, and it looks a bit messy on the page, but that's to visually illustrate that idea of wandering and of him being not settled. But so yeah, I think it took a few drafts to get that voice right and to make it consistent in some ways. But it was a bit, trials and error for a little bit.
I think you guys did a good job. You did a good job. Your team did a good job. And without overtly saying so, especially I said here part 2 in my notes, but it actually is part 3, delves into the impact of generational trauma. So your book spans decades. Wandering Souls spans decades. Is generational trauma in particular, that term, something that you were intentionally looking to explore? Did it just come naturally with the nature of the content that you were delving into?
Yeah, for sure. I think even just for me, because the book is personal, it's a story that affected me, and I'm the kind of second generation, right? So it's something that I think I had to explore because it's so close to me and so personal. And I was really interested in the idea that one event can just trickle down generation and affect the sons and daughters of refugees as well in ways that you sometimes don't expect as well, I think. And I also wanted the book to reflect the idea that you can inherit a story in a non-linear, non-straight way. So the way I learned about my mom's story was through pieces and pieces that I learned throughout the year. Of like 1 year, she would tell me one event that happened at the camp, and then the next year my dad would tell me an extra bit of information, and then it was also through doing my own research that I learned and managed to kind of piece together my family history as well. And so I wanted the book to show that as well, that it's sometimes up to us to piece together our own stories and our own past as well. But I also wanted the book to not be just about trauma, right? And I wanted the hope to be the key thing of the book, and the key thing that readers took out from the book was that you can heal from trauma, and there's always hope as well.
So, and I don't like to give away spoilers, but there's something that happens towards the end that brings, I'm not going to mention, I mentioned it in my notes to you, and you very graciously let that go, but I think I'm going to save what happens for the reader. But for anybody listening who wants to go back, it's on page 218. I don't know if the pages are the same, per edition,
so,
but
yeah.
in my edition, it's page 218. Let me tell you, I was reading it at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning, just, enjoying my coffee. And next thing, my husband looks over to me, and there's just tears streaming down my face. And I eventually got to sobbing. It was just, I don't know why I didn't expect it. It's not this huge groundbreaking plot twist either. It's just I called it poetic closure. That's tragic and beautiful at the same time. The human experience of that closure in relation to the topic of wandering souls just spoke to me in such a deep way and so beautifully unexpected.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
I told myself I've got to hold myself together while bringing that back up. Do you feel that the book itself brought you the same closure, or did it just give you insight, to process your own history? Was it a vehicle to process your own history, or was it did you get that same sense of, poetic closure?
For sure. I think I really did. I wrote the book when I was, I think 23, 24, when I was kind of becoming an adult and trying to learn more about my identity. And, I think I was maybe feeling a bit disconnected as well from my Asian heritage because I grew up in Europe. So the book came of a need for me to feel closer to that heritage and to learn more about my past as well. And I think this book really did that. And it helped me and my family, I think, as well, get that same sense that there is in the book of catharsis, and that writing, it feels a bit grand saying it like that and a bit like pretentious maybe, but just that.
Yeah, but that is, yes.
But that, they're like, stories can help us heal. I really believe that. And that book was a way of just, I think processing a lot of the horrible things that happened to my family and make something good in a way out of it, which was very, I think, healing.
I've been reading Rebecca Kuang's Yellowface, and you've mentioned it as well, there's a lot of mention of East Asian diaspora fiction. And as I'm reading Yellowface, I keep going back to, Athena Liu in Yellowface, and I keep thinking about Wandering Souls and the book that comes to fruition in Yellowface. It just all kind of connects for me, and it's given me sort of a deeper insight into your book, and your book has given me deeper insight into her book. So do you consider, was Wandering Souls an intentional contribution to diaspora fiction, or that was just you, wanting to write your story and your family story?
I think I think first and foremost, it was just me wanting to write the book that I felt I needed to write, and the book that was a bit healing to me as well. I think especially because I worked in publishing, when I was writing it, I was also very much aware that there was a bit of a gap in the market, which was the kind of much more objective side of me writing this book, right? That there was a gap in the market, and there was just not a lot of Southeast Asian stories, and especially Southeast Asian stories happening in the UK. And I think I was aware that there was maybe a slight growing appetite for these kind of stories, which kind of brought me hope. And I was thinking, I was writing first and foremost for myself, but also thinking like, I feel like maybe this is the right moment for this story to come out. And I wasn't the first one. And I came, when I was writing the book, East Side Voices came out, which is a collection of essays edited by Helena Lee, which is with Southeast and Southeast Asian writers as well, writing essays. There's lots of great poets like Mary Jean Chan and Will Harris and so on. So I was definitely not like the first one, but I feel like I was writing the book at a moment when there was a growing literature of East and Southeast Asian British talents. But so, now I'm very proud that the book is part of that diaspora, and that, it feels like we're at a kind of cornerstone moment. And there's other great books like Belize by Nicola Dinnan and Ghost Girl Banana by Wiz Wharton, who are also coming out this year, who are contributing to that literature. And so I'm very happy that there is a kind of moment happening now.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was hesitant to say, do I live under a rock, or is there a growing appetite for this? And no question on that, just to say that I'm so glad that there is a growing appetite for these stories, because obviously Southeast Asian culture is so rich in storytelling and in heritage, and it just fascinates me, and I'm really, really glad that this is that it's having its moment, and you can see it happening in the zeitgeist in both, fiction, and you can see it happening in television and generally pop culture. But it's so, as Yellowface has indicated, it's so important how the story is told and who tells the story. So, all I can say is I'm just a reader. Just keep coming. On that note about keeping it coming, you are if I'm not mistaken, you're currently working on your second novel, excuse me. What can readers expect from the next contribution? And how's the writing process going?
Yeah, it's slowly going at the moment. I just moved house, so I was kind of
Oh gosh.
hectic last few weeks, but I'm starting work on it now, and I think I just want the second book to be quite different from the first one and maybe less personal in some ways, because this book took a lot out of me, because it was personal and quite both very healing, but also mentally draining at some times. And so I think in book two will be more contemporary, maybe a love story, like, or at least a kind of element to that. But I can't say too much about it yet because it's still in the early stages. But I'm very excited to go back to a new project and kind of learn more about myself as well. And obviously I'm a full-time writer now, so just I'm still learning how to like write during the day now, and just it just feels great to have more time as well to write and not having to cram my writing between like 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So I'm very excited.
Isn't it weird to feel less rushed? I would imagine, because I'm a student in creative writing, so I am a writer. I'm a writer by profession. I'm a journalist, and it's different. Creative writing is different, as I'm sure you toggled the same. You straddled the same two worlds or similar two worlds when publishing, versus being a writer. You dealt with text all day long, and like I do, I deal with text either through reading or writing all day long, and then you got to come to a creative space. And now I would imagine there might be some days that you have this whole day ahead of you that's exciting, and other days that you're like, I just need the pressure of a deadline. I don't know. How does it feel? How does that feel? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm definitely someone who, like, at uni, I would write my essays like the day before the deadline. Like, I'm very much a kind of deadline person. So it's a new concept. I'm not like, there are definitely days where I'm not being productive enough, but I think it's also telling myself that that's okay if I don't write, 500 words every day. And I think also it's important for me in my process to take the time to read and, go out for walks and go to museums and just feel inspired by different things, because I think that's also for me just how I get the best writing out of me is just by feeling, not just being at a desk all day and feeling that pressure to write as well. I say that now. Maybe when I'm closer to like my actual like deadline for the novel, I'll be like more stressed. But yeah, for now I'm just still learning about what works best for me as well. But we'll see.
Because I mean, you used to writing in the evening, and I know. I mean, for all my sins, Cecile, I write best and am most productive in all my work, whether it's creative work or my usual work at like 3, 4 in the afternoon, which nowadays happens to be the time that I need to be fetching my children from school and getting homework and dinner done. It's not working out for me creatively. So I've had to kind of, I so relate to that, because you kind of have to toggle and be like, I need to now find different ways of being productive, right?
Exactly. So I'm trying to like just reboot myself, basically. Yeah. So, and I, my partner as well, like, is someone who goes to bed at like 10 p.m. And then, so I'm like trying to adjust as well. And I'm just trying, and it's easier in the summer, right? Because well, I guess it's probably winter in South Africa.
It's winter. It's winter.
But here it's summer, so it's actually easier for me to get up early in the morning and try and like, I try usually to read in the morning and then write in the afternoon, which is kind of nice. I think I just need to kind of set myself a routine. It is key when you're trying to write a big writing project, isn't it?
So is that something that you would advice that you would give to aspiring writers, is to find that routine or find what works for you? What has been a bit of a silver bullet that you went, okay, yes, this makes sense?
Yeah, I think definitely try and figure out what works best for you, because you get so many people trying to give you advice, right? And you always see those writers who say like, well, I wake up at 8 a.m. and don't leave my desk until I've written like 1,000 words. And then you have each writer has their own technique. And I think it's really about taking the time to figure out what works best for you and what gets your creativity going, and not feel like you need to do like that other writer that you admire and so on, because you're just all different, and you know what makes him a good writer will be different for you as well. So yeah, don't listen to too many advice would be my advice.
And lastly, before I ask you to lend us your voice, what are you currently reading? What's on your bedside table? And I'm asking you because you are in the process of also being productive. Bonnie Garmus, author of Lessons in Chemistry, told me a few weeks ago, if she's writing, she doesn't read fiction. She focuses on nonfiction so that she can focus on her fiction. And then you have other writers that kind of gain inspiration from reading. So what do you prefer, and what's currently on your bedside table?
Yeah, I usually go through kind of a binge reading phase where I'll read a lot, and I'll read both fiction and nonfiction. Karen, then I'll do that. I'll read maybe 20 books a month or something, and then once I've done that, I'll write more intensively. But I'd always try to have like one book going even when I'm writing. And I guess I used to read more nonfiction, but in the last couple of years, I've just been reading more fiction. But I'm not sure why that is. I think maybe just I'm craving more escapism. So right now I just finished reading The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan, which is coming out in 2024, which is a really brilliant book about Malaysia during the Second World War, when it was occupied by Japan. So that was a really great book that I really enjoyed. And then I started reading the Italo Calvino's Cosmic Comics short stories. So yeah, I tried to kind of have a mix of contemporary and maybe more classic literature as well, and I just try to read quite broadly, really.
And you're multilingual. Do you only read in English?
Yeah, I should try. I am trying to read more in French because French is my mother tongue, but I've kind of just haven't been reading in French a lot lately. But it's something that I'm trying to do more. And the book is coming out in French in August as well. So I'm starting to do a bit of promo in French. So yeah, I'm that's part of my kind of to-do list in the next few months is read more in French as well.
But you didn't translate the novel yourself?
No, I just thought that it would be best to let them have a translator, and it's it's such a different job, I think, to translate, and I wasn't sure I would have been able to do it justice. So Karen Tishaho is the translator, and then they very kindly sent me the translation and made me do as many edits as I wanted. So I made a few comments, but I was keen to let the translator be creative, and I kind of trusted her instincts as well, and I think she did a great job as well.
I kind of wish I could read in French. I wish I was multilingual in that way so that I could enjoy it. I can't imagine what it would be like reading. Well, I suppose I do read in a different language, but not like I do in English, so I can relate. It must be beautiful in French, and it must be beautiful in all the languages. In fact, I was on your website earlier today, and the novel, I'm just peeking at all of the stunning covers. Have you got them all in all of the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, France, Germany?
It's amazing, isn't it? I don't have the Netherlands and the French copies yet. I think the French copy hasn't printed yet, but yeah, otherwise I'll have them in my new flat. No, so not with me right now, but yeah, it's been so nice to see the different covers, and I think they all did such a great job. And I think there are a few more coming out next year as well. So very exciting.
So exciting. I'm really thrilled for you. I'm really thrilled for this process. I'm thrilled to, when it comes out, read your second novel. And no pressure by any means. Take your time. Enjoy the process. It's just such a pleasure to meet you, and I want you to lend your voice in English now to us and to read an extract from Wandering Souls. if you don't mind. And just to also contextualize it for the reader. So this, we don't really know who this narrator is. And I have to say, I don't know whether I'd be alone in this, but I assumed it was your voice. Because I had looked into your history. I mean, does it say on the back? I don't know. I don't know where I read it or had I Googled it that, you know, this was partly based on your own history. So I assumed that these parts were your voice, and I'll leave it up to the reader to figure out who it is. But yeah, if you could contextualize it for us and then read that extract for us. We're reading from page 63 and 64 on my edition.
Sure. So yes, this is a chapter which arrives quite early on in the novel, about a quarter through. And this is a kind of unknown narrator who's trying to piece together the story of the Vietnamese boat people. So you're not quite sure who she is yet. And I wanted the book to have that bit of tension on purpose, and at the end for readers to realize and feel that sense of relief once they kind of figure out exactly who she is and so on. But so I'm just going to go straight for it. So I realized that there's a lot more I could say. I could tell people about the rapes and murders, the whispers of cannibalism. I have read testimonies in books and papers and encyclopedias, and these accumulated learnings have become my burden. But how much should I include? Sometimes I get tempted to go to the other way too, to correct the past by rewriting it. Perhaps I could write something like this. They arrived in Hong Kong, and their parents and younger siblings arrived a few weeks later. Baby Kuang waking up from a long nap in his mother's arms. Dan, his brothers, played a football game with the other children in the camp, their mothers looking on from a bench. Mai and Van, inseparable as always, whispered and giggled to one another about their classmates and Mrs. Jones. And after a brief stint at the camp, they all flew to America, where they were welcomed with open arms. Yes, that would be tempting, to give them a happy ending. Or perhaps I could go further. I could add twists and turns to build in tension. I could write an emotional roller coaster. I could explore the boat more, for example. Yes, perhaps I should. Or perhaps I could point fingers. I could blame politics. I could blame war and poverty and pirates and the sea and the storm. But the more I go on, the more I realize that nothing is to blame and everything is to blame, intertwined in a medley of cause and effect, history and nature. I am trying to carve out a story between the macabre and the fairy tale, so that a glimmer of truth can appear.
That's beautiful. It was my most marked section in the book, and so it was such a pleasure to hear it straight from the author. Thank you so much, Cecile Pin, and thank you for joining me on TGE's Current Read.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam. I had such a lovely time.